So I just returned from New York. I was there for 2 days exploring some of the most iconic, well-known pizzerias in New York. My purpose was to come up with certain characteristics to really grade or define New York pizza by. And so I really took a deep dive and focused on these different topics. I came up with these 13 characteristics of New York pizza, and I analyzed each one of these pizzerias according to these characteristics. My intent here is not so much to give you my opinion of what's the best and what isn't. Although you may hear my opinion, it's really to come up with some objective data in order to, really learn how to make better New York style pizza. And so the first place I went was DiFara in Manhattan. The original DiFara is in Brooklyn. It was just a lot more convenient for me to go to the one in Manhattan, downtown. And so I headed over there first. And this place is quite legendary, and I was expecting big things. I was there kind of in an odd hour, probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was the only one there, and quite honestly, I was pretty disappointed with the sauce, with the pizza overall. I didn't want to carry a ruler around with me all day, so I just marked one of my credit cards in 5mm segments. So each line you see on the card is 5mm. The center of the crust came in at 7mm. So that's the pointy shape of the piece. The outside towards the rim, it topped out at about 10mm thick. And then the crust itself, the rim of the crust, was about 15mm. For the crust, I'm going to look at the color, the density, and the crispiness. And for the crispiness, what I'm going to do is just fold the slice over in half and see what kind of cracking there is in the crust. And so here we've got some minor cracking, so I'm going to say that that's basically a medium crispiness. Crust was pretty dense. It was flat. It was, more so than others. But there were some air bubbles in it. Next, I really paid attention to the crust flavor because in my experimentations with pizza, I have learned that different types of flour, different brands, they actually have a totally different taste than others. The taste can vary a lot. And some flour simply has more taste than others. And I have also observed that flour that is not bleached, it probably always has a better taste than bleached flour. And this crust here at DiFara had a little bit of flavor. It was actually decent crust. It just wasn't as lightweight and airy as most other pizzerias in New York, at least most other good pizzerias. Moving on to the sauce. So for the sauce, we're either going to see puree or small chunks or big chunks. And at DiFara, they use large chunks. Okay, next category I'm looking at is whether the sauce is flavored or if they just use plain crushed tomatoes. And at DiFara, they did have some seasoning, but no, I don't think they had any sweetener. If they did, it was very little. So they did use some seasoning in the tomatoes, probably not any sweetener. Next category I'm looking at is the quantity of sauce. And DiFara used a lot of sauce. Probably 2 or 3 times more sauce, or 4 times much, as are the pizzerias. Next category I'm looking at is the type of cheese. Most of the pizzerias in New York are going to use either part skim or a mixture of part skim and whole. And these guys seem to be part skim. And then I'm looking at next is the amount of cheese used. And DiFara used very little. You're going to see the pictures of the upcoming pizzerias. Some just use more than others, but DiFara used very little. And the next category I'm looking at is the burn marks on the cheese. So some pizzerias have burn marks, like little brown marks on the cheese. Others don't. Others have a lot. There was none on DiFara. I think it was the only pizzeria I went to that had 0 burn marks. As we head over to Scarr's, I'm going to share a few thoughts on DiFara. You'll notice in the picture there's some basil leaves. then obviously the crushed tomatoes. And both the basil leaves and the crushed tomatoes they're not fresh. I know this because in my own experimentations, I've had tomatoes and basil sit in the fridge for too long, and they just don't taste good, just a little bit rancid. And that's how this was, surprisingly, because I know this pizzeria has a great reputation. But my experience was not great, so I probably won't be going back. There's way too much great competition out there. So here we are at Scarr's, 35 Orchard Street. Has a great reputation also. And I took some measurements there, and the center of the crust, the pointy part, came in 6 millimeters. Towards the rim, it came in 8 millimeters. The crust rim was really bubbly, lots of air bubbles in it. So it was kind of hard to get a measurement, but it was between 15 and 20 millimeters. And crispness was, I gave it a medium crisp. You know, when I hold the slice up and fold it, I got some cracking, but not huge cracking. Probably about average for a good slice of New York pizza. So medium crispness and then medium burn marks. Next category, the crust weight. So this was the lightest and airiest crust that I had in New York. And it was so good. I loved it. It was, even though it was really lightweight and thin, it was really strong crust. The crust itself had some flavor. Okay, the sauce was a puree with some seasoning, and there was definitely some sweetener added. Now, the sauce quantity was very little. The sauce quality was high, meaning the tomatoes had good flavor. And again, I believe it was part skim cheese, and these little these little cheese. And the cheese burn marks, as you can see, there were some. So I gave it a moderate amount of burn marks. We're going to head over to Coronet. There's a few Coronets around. I went to the one on Lexington Avenue. Okay, for most people who have not been in New York, I think they would consider Coronet the prototypical slice of New York pizza. It's a little bit thicker than the other places I went to on the strip, but it's still thin compared to what people are used to. A lot thinner than your Domino's or Pizza Hut or whatever. The center of the crust came in at 7 millimeters. Towards the rim, it was 10 millimeters. And the rim itself was 23 millimeters. This was the first pizzeria I went to so far that uses a crisper. And the crust itself, as you can see, is more of a golden color. And this indicates that the oven is not too hot. I'd probably guess it's around 600 degrees, 620 maybe, 650 at the very most. But the using crisper, the crispiness was not as high as others. I gave it a low crisp. When you fold it over, just a couple of little cracks. The crust weight I gave was medium density. As you can see there, there's very few, or maybe no, large air bubbles. It has that more of a bread consistency in the crust. Now, when I tasted the crust itself, it really had a bland flavor. It just tasted like nothing. So to me, that tells me that they're using a bleached flour. Now the sauce was a puree, and it was seasoned and sweetened. It was actually fairly sweet. The sauce quantity is medium. Now the quality of the tomatoes, I put it high because the sauce actually tasted really good. It had good flavor. Now the cheese. Coronet used more cheese than any other pizzeria I went to this trip. Still not as much as most people would expect because they're used to tons of cheese, you know, from their local Papa John's or whatever. Oh, and the cheese was really, it was gooey and stretchy. So to me that indicates that they used use either they either mixed in a whole milk mozzarella with skim, or it was entirely whole milk. I'm not sure, but it was more stretchy and gooey than most. So it was really good. Actually, I made note that the cheese quality, it just tasted really good. So this was a favorite place of Frank Sinatra back in the day. I guess he used to go up there. He'd take Dean Martin and other performers up there after their performances at night. Sinatra even made a song where he mentioned Patsy's Pizza. This is the pizza oven, the original one that was installed in 1933. They say it gets up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and at that temperature, you can bake a pizza in 60 or 70 seconds. However, I observed them baking pizzas, and it was taking longer than that, probably closer to 3 minutes. So apparently they don't run it at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit every day, or if they do, they're not placing the pizzas close to that hottest corner, wherever that is. The center of the crust was only 5 millimeters, and is actually 5 millimeters throughout almost the entire pizza. Only towards like the last inch towards the rim did it expand out to like 6 or 7 millimeters. But it was pretty much 5 millimeters for the whole pie. The crust was really crispy, and it had some small burn marks. And the crust was very flavorful and salty. The sauce was small chunks of crushed tomatoes, just like you see in Italy. And the sauce was plain, only salt added, and used very little sauce. And the sauce, the quality of the tomatoes was very high, the best out of all the pizza I've ever had in New York. And I think he was using a mixture of parts skim and whole. And I graded it as a medium amount of cheese with very minor burn marks. And that was Patsy's. Now, next I went down to Joe's on Carmine Street, Greenwich Village. Joe's, as you may know, it has a reputation in some circles as being the best New York pizza. I would disagree with that a little bit, and I'm going to tell you why based off these characteristics. But it is the trendiest, probably, for sure. It's the place all the celebrities go. It's open. There's a few locations around, but some of them are open till like 5 in the morning. So these celebrities go out, party all night, and go and get their pizza at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and they go to Joe's. So it gets a lot of publicity. Let's look at the data here. So the center of the crust is 5 millimeters, very thin, but it does thicken out a little bit to about 8 millimeters towards the rim, and the rim itself was about 12 millimeters. Now, Joe's is a bit of an outlier. It was very crispy because it was basically burned, the bottom. And I've been here multiple times. It's always the same. It's just their style. The bottom of the pizza crust is what I would call burned. A little bit burned. Not huge burn, but just a little overcooked. And they also use a crisper. So they put it right on the oven surface initially, and then after a few minutes, take it out and put it on a crisper for another couple minutes. Oh, and in case you're unaware, the way a crisper works is it basically, it makes the bottom, it gives the bottom of the pie some relief from the hot oven, so you can cook up longer without it getting burned. That cooking it longer is what gives it the extra crispiness. And the crust weight, it was a medium density with some large air bubbles. What I was disappointed at was this is the first time I ever really paid attention to the exact taste of the crust, and it was really, really bland. It tasted like Coronet. The sauce is a puree. It's a plain sauce with only sugar and salt. So there's no seasoning. Now, again, I was paying attention specifically to the sauce to see what it tasted like, to see if there's seasoning, see what the quality of the tomatoes were, and I actually found out that the tomatoes are not a great quality. They're not horrible, but they're not great. And how do I know? Because I've done a lot of testing. I've tested almost every brand of tomatoes out there. I've done side-by-side testing, with multiple brands, and I can tell when you get a lower quality tomato, you have to add a lot of sugar to make it not sour. in part because the lower quality tomatoes are always putting citric acid in as a preservative. And so to counter that acidic taste that they're adding on top of flat tomatoes, you have to add a lot of sugar. And I could tell that's exactly what they are doing here. The tomatoes were just very, very average with a lot of sugar added, and the end result just isn't that flavorful. So the sauce quantity, they use little sauce. For the sauce quality, I put medium, cheese type, part skim, cheese amount, little, cheese burn marks, minor. About here, you can see, you look at the bottom, you can tell that's just basically what I would call overcooked crust, but for them it's normal. So that was Joe's. Now, I went to one other place. I'm not even going to take the data on it because it was so horrible. But if you've ever been in New York, you will notice that there's pizzerias around that will sell you a slice for $1 or $1.25 or $1.50. And I went to one of those just to try it out, see how it was like. It was actually right next to my hotel. So I went to this place called Two Bros Pizza, Times Square. Generally speaking, I would just not even waste your time or money with this cheap pizza. It is so horrible. Ingredients are terrible. The whole thing, I ate it and it made me not want to eat any more pizza. It was that bad. Generally speaking, if you've never been to New York and you're going to go, I would stay away from Times Square restaurants completely. Because what happens is Times Square is the most popular tourist destination in New York. So you have all these tourists from all over the world. And they come in and they're expecting some fantastic food, fantastic pizza, and that's their expectation. And they don't really know what great pizza should taste like, so they just get off the subway there and go to their hotel, and they go to the pizzeria around the corner, and they think it's fantastic because that's what they're expecting, and so they give it good reviews. So you're going to have all these places, all these restaurants around Times Square that have great reviews that are just horrible pizza and horrible food. I've only been to 2 pizzerias in New York that I couldn't finish the slice. It was that bad, and they were both in Times Square. So with that in mind, here's Two Bros, stopped in and tried their pizza, and it was so bad that I couldn't finish it. I didn't even want to finish it. As you can see, the crust is just like flappy, and it was just really dense. Wasn't cooked according to New York standards. It had zero flavor. The sauce was like incredibly sweet. It was like sweet as candy type of sauce. And the cheese was the worst cheese I've ever had before, probably. And what it reminded me of was when I was a kid and you'd go to your friend's house and they have these little frozen pizza things, that you put in the microwave. That's kind of what this pizza tasted like. So I'm not going to waste time collecting data on it. It's not real New York pizza. So anyways, here's the chart. Take a look if you'd like. I'm going to put some more videos out showing you how I make New York pizza. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments.